It's easy to see when politics tries to have a direct impact on free art, for example by dictating what viewers can and cannot see. However, the situation in today's pop culture is a bit more complicated, and events that distort the political and social climate can indirectly influence entire trends, for example in the film industry. What is not the only, but the most vivid example of this is the rapid change that occurred in American pop culture, reaching all over the world, after the September 11th attacks. Today's popular culture is dominated by American centrism, as Rammstein expressed in their song, "We All Live in America." This means nothing less than that ideas, reality, culture, and even social problems are directly transferred from the USA to other nations under the influence of American mass culture, often without contemplating their meaning. An additional aspect of this is the domination of American creators over domestic ones, reflected in a much broader interest in Hollywood films than in domestic productions or the displacement of domestic books by those from the USA. Therefore, if US policy influences American pop culture, it will inevitably also influence the domestic audience. Whether we want it or not, we are touched by the echoes of every major upheaval or shock faced by the culture and political scene of the USA. Perhaps the best example would be the attack on the World Trade Center at the beginning of the century. As it turns out, both the short-term and long-term effects had a significant impact on the film industry. One of the most direct examples could be Sam Raimi's Spider-Man, whose initial posters featured two towers reflected in the hero's eye, and the first trailer showed the rescue of a helicopter that Spider-Man suspends between the WTC towers. Both the posters and the trailer disappeared shortly afterward, and scenes in which the WTC is shown in the film were deleted. Furthermore, as a response to the prevailing social sentiments immediately after the attack, Sam Raimi decided to incorporate a few pro-patriotic scenes into the superhero film. This included the hero moving against the backdrop of a giant American flag and New Yorkers throwing garbage at the Green Goblin while shouting that if a villain messes with one of them, he messes with them all. A similar fate befell films like Serendipity, in which all scenes shot before September 11th were digitally stripped of the view of the Twin Towers, as well as Stuart Little 2, Mr. Deeds, and Zoolander. It's enough to say that the list of films from which damaged buildings were removed or added as a consequence of the attacks includes several dozen titles. However, more drastic changes affected the 2002 animation Lilo and Stitch. In the original ending, a friendly alien hijacks a plane from an airport and flies through a town in Hawaii, destroying buildings along the way. After the attack, the creators decided to redesign the entire ending, transforming the plane into a spaceship and the city into mountain peaks on a Hawaiian island. The self-censorship stemming from cultural shock had the potential to delay or even lead to the cancellation of entire films. For instance, the romantic comedy, View from the Top, unfolding in airport settings and on airplane decks, faced a postponement from Christmas 2001 to March 2003 solely due to the presence of airplanes in the movie. Among the films we will never see due to the WTC, we can include Nosebleed, with Jackie Chan, a story about a man washing windows on the WTC towers who thwarts a terrorist attack. Also, the planned sequel to Forrest Gump, which, in the face of tragedy, turned out to be felt meaningless, at least according to Tom Hanks, who explained the end of the production in this way. And while these and other cases may seem understandable, we can contemplate the long-term effects in the context of cinema before and after the WTC attack. Take disaster movies as an example, such as Armageddon from 1998, where the Earth is threatened with destruction by a comet. Despite the revolutionary depiction of destruction and the poignant theme, the film's atmosphere is rather light, with jokes sprinkled throughout. America is portrayed from NASA's perspective, hastily crafting a plan on the fly to deal with the problem. Though taken by surprise, it manages to defend the world thanks to its cowboys and a sense of community. And while the final scenes can be described as touching, from today's perspective, we can't say the film took itself too seriously. A similar situation is seen in Independence Day, from 1996, where the audience could revel in images of the destruction of New York or the exploding White House. These were presented in purely entertaining cinema, with the extraterrestrial theme not taken too seriously. After the WTC attack, let's take a look at War of the Worlds, a film attempting, with varying degrees of success, to adapt H.G. Wells' work to contemporary realities. Here, there's no room for frivolity. The tragedy, the alien invasion, is approached very seriously and realistically. Tom Cruise returns home, covered in dust and in shock, much like the people fleeing from the collapsing towers. The alien tripods evoke genuine fear, and any sense of community is absent. Each individual, like the hero of the story, copes with the tragedy within their own family. The story's ending, although positive, isn't determined by people, and the conclusion itself is rather bittersweet. Unlike the appearance of a happy ending with a wedding in Armageddon, we are presented with an image of a fallen family finding bonds and support in each other despite everything. Even comic book films like Nolan's Batman series are dark and realistic, in stark contrast to their counterparts from the 90s. Incidentally, considering the flamboyance of the 90s, this change might not have been such a bad thing after all. On the other hand, the perception of terrorists has changed. In the 80s and 90s, they were often cast in the role of contextual evil and quite diverse. We had, for example, IRA terrorists in the movie The Crying Game, or German terrorists in Die Hard. After the attacks on the WTC, terrorists are very often implicitly portrayed as Muslims. Even Iron Man ends up, not as in the comic book original, in Vietnam, but in the Middle East, abducted by fighters living in caves with the appearance of jihadists. American Sniper shoots at masked, faceless, and identityless Muslims as if they were ducks, providing catharsis to an audience hungry for justice. Echoes of such changes can be observed even in children's films. When adapting the story of Sinbad the Sailor, DreamWorks Studio completely shifted its original Arabic context to Greek and Mediterranean settings. Perhaps this was done because a hero from Baghdad might not have connected well with the American audience in 2003. In this context, we can also mention examples of other themes from American politics and pop culture, such as addressing the colonial past. In James Cameron's Avatar, colonial crimes against Native Americans are projected onto the entire evil humanity. Just like the audience in the USA, the audience in other nations is presented with the image of the Na'vi, intended to evoke the noble indigenous inhabitants of pre-Columbian America living in symbiosis with nature, standing in contrast to us, even though non-Americans were not part of this history. When talking about the influence of American politics on pop culture, it would be easy to theorize about American propagandists spreading their influence around the world through popular culture, books, games, and films. Pop culture, by its nature, is susceptible to influence, or better to say, absorbent. Reacts and stays up to date with the real world to design believable and understandable worlds for viewers, so that there can be a suspension of disbelief, that is the game of believing in the fictional story created by the film, and the viewer can thus undergo immersion, thanks to which we talk about escapism, that is escape from our here and now. An additional question is which values reflected in pop culture appear completely naturally, which are artificially imposed, and which are the result of the need for catharsis, to release, or perhaps even overreact to, the shocks and tragedies the world goes through from time to time. At the same time, pop culture, as a carrier of information, propaganda, and attitudes, reaches more effectively where the press or ideologists would have difficulty breaking through, to the youngest generations. And it is easy to notice that some social problems raised by American pop culture and concerning their own society are sometimes transplanted to other nations without a second thought, often without considering whether all the issues raised in the USA are fully justified in another country. Therefore, when observing our own reactions to topics discussed in Americanized pop culture, it is worth asking ourselves not only whether we are overreacting to the problems presented therein but also whether these problems are ours at all. If you found this video interesting, please share it and help reaching more audience with its message. If you don't want to miss any further episodes, subscribe and allow notifications.